What is up, everyone? JDM here, aka Josh David Miller, aka the shredder of business models. And what I do for a living is I help first-time founders launch their products sooner, find their first customers faster, and scale quicker. And every single Thursday at 10 a.m. Pacific, I open my doors to your questions. We got some great ones today. We're going to talk about what founders should focus on in the economic downturn. We're going to talk about what you do to get a prototype in front of your customer. What do you do once that prototype is actually there? And if you have a question, you can always fill one out at this link and send me a question in advance. You can ask your questions in the chat, of course, but if you do hit this link, then you can actually record a little video of you asking a question. If you do, I'll actually play it in real time, live on the show here. But before we get to our questions today, couple of announcements. So some fun stuff. So first, this is a little thank you to June. So last week during office hours, June asked me to kind of do a little UX comparison review between old version of her site, new version of her site, that's organicnearby.com. And so I kind of did that just in real time on the show, and I actually had a really great time. It was a lot of fun. And as I heard from a few of you, that it was really valuable. So I want to do something like that again. And maybe in the future, I'll do more UX teardowns. If that's of interest to you guys, you can send me stuff like that. I'm happy to review it. Super helpful, particularly for software founders. But I thought next week I might do a pitch deck teardown. So if you are out there and you're pitching your startup and you want a review of your deck, you can send it to me, and next week on the show, or maybe the week after, but sometime in the next 2 weeks, I will actually review that deck in real time on the show, shred it, and give you all kinds of great feedback about what you can do to really improve your chances of success there. So if that's interesting to you, you want me to take a look at your deck, you can definitely just email it to me at this email address, and or whatever platform you're on now, just message me, and happy to get you involved in that. Should be super fun. Okay, enough about that. Let's actually dive into our questions today. So AZ wanted to throw me a curveball here. In fairness, I did challenge everybody to try to stump me. So this is a really good effort to do that. It's like, so I'm actually going to read his question in its entirety, because it's kind of a complicated one. So he said, hey, JDM, Y Combinator and some of the other entities that support startups have given their 2 cents on what founders should be focused on in a downturn. And the question is, well, what do you think founders should focus on or think about during these times? So it's a good question. And it's a hard one, and I'm going to kind of come at it from a different direction. It's kind of an obvious one. Before I do that, I should say, confession, this live show is pre-recorded. So I had a conflict today, so I'm actually recording this on Tuesday, and you'll see it on Thursday in real time. But definitely keep the conversation going in the chat. I love hearing from you guys, and I'll be checking it a little bit later in the day. Okay, so what do founders focus on during the downturn? So let me, for those of you who aren't aware, what he's alluding to here is that there are signs of maybe a coming recession. Definitely, we have inflation now, and that's going to increase borrowing costs and all kinds of other things. And so there's the expectation that capital may start to dry up, that it may start becoming more difficult for startups to acquire capital. Amongst other things as well. So, how should founders think about that? Like, what should we focus on? What do we do in order to do that? And so there's a couple things that I want to say. The first thing that I want to say about that is we don't know that that's true yet. And so I want to caution that, yes, we should absolutely think about it and be prepared for it, but we don't know it's true yet. And so it's kind of an eventuality. The second, so with that aside, I want to say 2 things. And they're both in the same lines. And so this has to do with where your money comes from. And I think by and large, one of the biggest mistakes that startup founders make, and I mean this as literally one of the biggest mistakes that startup founders make, is right from the outset, they start focusing on investment. And that just kind of dictates their entire path. So everything from day one, the whole to-do list, the whole roadmap, it all becomes about how do I get investment? And I think it actually poisons the journey a bit, because investors don't put you into business and investors don't keep you in business, subject to a couple of asterisks. Customers do. Customers put you in business and customers keep you in business. And so instead of thinking about like from day one, how do I get investors to fund my startup, you want to think about how do I get customers to invest in my startup? Because economic downturn or no, customers are still going to be buying shit. And it'd be nice if they bought it from you. So think about how you can actually get revenue up front from your customers. So I want to break this into like two stages of life cycle. So early, friends, family, and fools, pre-seed, seed, and then like get into like series A, B, C are a bit different. But when we're in those really early stages and we're trying to get from 0 to 1 customer, from 1 to 10 customers, or whatever it is, like we're pre-traction or we've got minimal traction. We're just trying to like get into the process here. It really does become all about the customers, and then our tactics don't change. And then the benefit is that we actually don't have to be dependent on that capital. We don't, it's like, it's great. Okay, cool. We can get it. And there's nothing wrong with pursuing it necessarily, but it doesn't have to be our only path. It's going to force us to think about what are some other ways that we can do this. And a lot of founders think that they can't actually like pre-sell or get revenue on their startup before building it, like before doing it. And so like, then I got to go build the thing. In order to build the thing, I need money. In order to get money, I got to go investors and do that whole thing. It's not really true. If you find customers first, most of the time you can get them to pay you to build it. Particularly in the B2B side, and on the B2C side, there are ways to do that as well. I mean, we're talking about, getting letters of intent, pre-sell, crowdfunding. There's all different kinds of ways to do that, up to and including things like Concierge and Wizard of Oz and all kinds of other stuff, where we can actually start putting offers out there, getting real data back, and then hopefully real revenue back on this idea without ever having to build the thing. Right. And then even if we do need to build a thing, there are ways to build things that are based on either our own equity investment, like say finding a co-founder, or using revenue from customers to fund further development. So there are lots of other paths for it. And so I encourage startups at any time, but particularly if capital is starting to get harder, if you're in those early stages, find ways of getting to revenue without doing that. Don't be dependent on that. So then if we go on later in the process where it's not about, say, building the thing, it's not about finding some customers, it's about scale, right? It's about how do we take this thing that's been proven, we got traction, we got all this stuff out there, and we want to grow the damn thing. So when it comes to that, yeah, sometimes you're going to need an injection of a substantive amount of capital, particularly if you have to grow quickly for market reasons. And in those cases, I actually don't necessarily expect that level of capital to dry up as much. That is less available anyway, and so I'm not sure that, like, I'm less convinced right now. Okay, June 14th, I'm less convinced of that being a really big problem. So and honestly, it's a good problem to have. So once you get there, you've already got a startup that's getting revenue and it's working, and you've got some traction and all that stuff. So if you end up in that situation, that's actually a good one too. And there are other opportunities. But early stages, don't focus on getting investment. Focus on actually getting customers. The second thing that I wanted to say about kind of reframing the thought around that is that there's a lot of interesting trends in the way that startups are acquired that I find very interesting. So one of them is this idea of buying startups before we would traditionally do that. So before a PE firm, a private equity firm would be interested, before, certainly way before an IPO, but probably even before a competitor acquisition. So we're not talking about these like necessarily $20 million acquisitions. We're certainly not talking about, the $100 million acquisitions. We're talking about $500,000 acquisitions. $1 million acquisitions, like that kind of range, these smaller transactions, which is where MicroAcquire, which I think is the most popular platform for this, kind of specialized. That's where it gets its name, MicroAcquire, because it's about these smaller acquisitions. That is focusing on a completely different way of getting cash and capital that I do not expect to change, at least not dramatically as part of the downturn. So if depending on what your actual strategy is, if you want to, like if you're a builder and it's like, I'm going to get this thing, I'm going to build it, I'm going to put it out there, and I want to dump it, and then I'm going to move on to my next idea, and I'm just going to, like, I'm a serial entrepreneur and I'm going to keep doing that stuff, then that might be an interesting path, like to keep, to keep a lookout for, because you can build something and then just kind of kick it, and for again a lower return, but then you can move on to something bigger. And once you have that first little exit, even if it's a smaller one, you are now much it's going to be much easier to raise capital in the future. You can have the experience as well to work on something that's bigger and more scalable. So hope that that's helpful. I wanted to kind of come at it from a little bit different side. If you want to hear how how investors are thinking about this, particularly at the venture stage, then check out some of those resources that AZ alluded to, like Y Combinator is putting out advice and stuff like that. So so there's that. Cool. And let me know what your guys' thoughts are. Really curious. How do you think the economic downturn is going to affect startup capital and startups in general? Let me know down in the comments. Super curious what your thoughts are. Let's move on to question 2. So our next question today is how you do this process of customers and prototypes. So we really commonly tell startups that you need to create a little prototype and put it in front of customers. And I mean, I just did actually in my previous answer. It's something we do all the time, and it's not just for founders that don't have a product. Oftentimes it has to do with a new feature or something else that we want to do with our product. And we need to find a way to put something in front of the customer to see if we're on the right track. Is this feature worth building, right? Is this the right direction to go? Or we're out and we're in customer segment A, we think customer segment B is interesting, but like the platform's going to need tweaking. And so, we want to figure out if we're on the right track by putting something in front of customer B. There's a million reasons to do prototypes, but most people don't really know how to do it, like how it actually works. So I want to say 2 things about it. I want to say the prototype, or 3 things actually. Prototype itself, how you get it in front of customers, and what you do once you're in front of the customers. So those 3 things. First, the prototypes themselves. So this is going to be largely dependent on your stage and what you're working on. There's a big difference between creating a new feature and prototyping something that doesn't exist at all. So, but it's on a spectrum and it's pretty well understood. I actually posted on my blog the other day my 5 go-to prototyping tools. So you can feel free to check that out. I'll put the link in the show notes as well. But those roughly are, like, one of my favorites is paper. Honestly, it's like literally you draw something on a piece of paper and you show it to a customer. And I'll talk about what that looks like in that 3rd question. But paper, you can do hi-fi prototypes in something like Figma, where you actually create something that maybe even looks pixel perfect. That's obviously a pretty far end prototype. You can do something much sooner than that. But there's there's different ways to actually prototype that, including even doing it as concierge, which a lot of startup founders do, where you actually do it as a service in essence for a customer to prove that they're willing to pay for it. And then once customers are willing to pay for the thing, then you create a product to replace the service that you're offering. It's a pretty common way to do that. Well, that is also a kind of prototype. And then there's like Wizard of Oz, where you create a facade, right, of this service. So they think that they're interacting with an app, like your customer's interacting with an app, but then behind the scenes, like, the secret sauce is you. The secret sauce is an AI or some brilliant algorithm or all that stuff. It's paper clips and chewing gum, baling wire, and Zapier. That's all just connecting shit together. And then you're the the wizard behind the curtain, making that all work. Again, that's another different kind of prototype. There's all different kind of prototypes out there. So that's a bigger question. If you guys want to know about prototypes, let me know. But setting that aside a second, you're going to create something that with the intent of putting it in front of customer and getting an answer to a question, which brings us to, how do you get it in front of customers? This part is pretty dependent on what and why. So if you're trying to go from 0 to 1, haven't built a product yet, it's a new idea, we want to see if we're on the right track with customers, then what you want to do is Startup 101, you want to go to where the customers hang out, you want to talk to them, you want to develop relationships with them, build empathy, understand, do they have the problem, how severe is it, how many of these people are out there. And while you're doing that, you're collecting contact information by people who are opting in to be like, yeah, I do experience that problem, that's me, right? These are the people then you can show prototypes to later. If you're further along and it's about a new feature for your app, then it's about finding a select group of customers that make the most sense to test whatever that thing is. If you're going after a new customer segment, that's probably either coming from sales. So oftentimes the sales team will start, they'll smell a deal and they'll start chasing it. And then somebody at the, back in leadership will go, well, wait a minute here, that's not our customer that we're chasing. And so now we have this other opportunity sitting out there. So then there's probably already customers on the table, and you can do a prototype as part of the sales process to pre-sell or get letters of intent or something like that to do that. Fantastic. If you are chasing a new customer segment that doesn't come from sales, then it probably, or at least should, be coming from the same thing as a 0 to 1 startup, where you're just going out there where the customers are and you're finding them and you're talking to them and understanding the problem. So however it is, that's how you get in front of customers. The next question related to that is, when we're talking about getting it in front of customers, how many are we talking about? Most people think that it's a lot. Most people think I need to, put this prototype in front of 100 customers and, get like some real statistical significance and all that stuff around. And you don't. The number of customers that you usually want to put a prototype in front of is 5. Just 5. And the reason is that we're not actually looking for quantitative data. We're looking for qualitative data. We're looking to see, are we on the right track? And the way to know if we're on the right track is to get a small group of people together and look for resonance. Are we hearing the same thing from all 5? If we're hearing the same thing of all 5, then directionally we're on the right track, or directionally we're completely on the wrong track. But it's one, right? It's one of the two. If we're getting mixed signals, then that's exactly what they are. Mixed signals. They're not a good enough result yet. Right. And so we have to keep, going back through that process. In order for that number 5 to work, you also have to be asking a pretty specific question. And so this could be something like a really common thing that I think is fantastic to prototype before you build it is how you do onboarding. More startups that are, mobile apps or web apps, SaaS, something like that, more startups should be prototyping their onboarding and putting it in front of customers first to figure out, will people go from step A all the way to step Z and end up activated users on our platform? Because if they don't, you're wasting all of that money getting people acquired into the product that never actually activate. And therefore, you'll never get revenue from them. You want to make sure that that process really works. It's super important. Right? It may not be number 1 on the list, right? But it is really important. So when it comes time to spending time and energy onto your onboarding experience, you're gonna want to, put that prototype out in front of people. And so the question that we're asking is, do people fall through that process and end up at the end? That's what we're trying to answer. And 5 is more than enough to say, does that work? And while you're going through these customer interviews, which we'll talk about in a second, while you're going through those, you're going to learn all kinds of interesting things. There was confusion here. This was clear. This step is extra. Like, hey, there was some minor friction when they tried to do this. And maybe we don't want to do that as part of onboarding. Maybe we'll try to find a way to do that later. Or, hey, actually people are kind of giving up on this one spot here. Maybe this is going to lead to some abandoning and we don't want that. So, how do we fix that and tweak that, right? And you're just going to learn all those little things along the way. But the broader question is, will this sufficiently take a pool of people from A to Z and get them into our system? Just as an example, right? So that's why 5 is more than enough. It's directional and we're asking a very specific question. Okay, so that's the prototype and then how you get it in front of customers, and the right number being 5. And then the last part of that is, what do you do once you actually get a customer in front of you with the prototype? What do you literally, what do you do? And there's actually a lot less information floating out there about this question than I thought. So it's a good one to talk about. And so there's a couple pieces here. And I think the biggest piece is, do you actually show them a prototype, or do you have them interact with the prototype? That's the big question. And everything kind of falls underneath those 2 columns on the page. And so in the case of where you show them a prototype, this is where, it's not ready for them to interact with, right? And so I'm going to show them something and they're going to tell me what they're doing, but I'm going to be in the driver's seat because I don't want, it's not real yet. So that's where you want to do that. And a good example of that is paper, right? In paper, it's literally pages, and they're not necessarily in sequence because, flows can go, you can do click here or click here. Well, those take you to different pages. And so you can't just have them flip through the pages. You're going to have to do it yourself. But the important part there is what I said before, where you show it to them, but they're in the driver's seat. That's what has to happen. Even if you're driving the literal transitions between things, even if it's on paper, that they have to be in control. So you show them the screen, you shut the fuck up, and then they tell you what they do. I click this button, right? I type in my name, right? They tell you those things. They're telling you what they're doing to interact with the system. And that's getting you the data that you need. So you let them be in the driver's seat, even if it's paper. Now, The advantage of doing something like paper is that because it's so low fidelity, you're going to get mostly feedback, not on UI, not on placement of buttons and stuff like that, because frankly, you're probably not ready for that yet, but you're going to get feedback on how does the flow work? Does it make sense to go from screen A to screen B? Or like, wait, why am I seeing this thing now? Or, it's like, I just want to, end up doing whatever it is that you told me that I'd get out of signing up for this thing, and you're making me fill out 14 screens before I get there. You're going to get that level stuff, which is really valuable. Whereas when you do a hi-fi prototype or something in Figma and you go through that same process, people are going to start thinking of it like, I don't like where that button is or the color or whatever. And if you're ready for that feedback as well, fantastic. But if you're not, don't do that, because you're signaling to them by the hi-fi prototype, by this high quality prototype, that you're ready for it. That's one of the real advantages of paper, which is why I like doing paper prototypes, is because nobody's paying attention to that stuff because they get it like it's a sketch on a piece of paper, right? But either way, they're kind of in charge. That same dynamic plays if they are actually doing the literal clicking on things. And so this can work in a few different places. So you can actually create like clickable prototypes in Figma, for example. You could, if it's a simple flow that doesn't have any control logic, or at least not much control logic, then you can do that in Google Slides or Keynote or PowerPoint or wherever, because the screens themselves, as soon as you click, no matter where you click, it advances to the next slide. And you can set up links to click. If you click in this particular region, it'll go to slide 12 instead of, like, you can do some of that if you need to, like for a few different pieces in it. Then they can actually be in control. Then what you're doing is actually not controlling anything. They're not only in the driver's seat, but you're watching where do they get stuck, right? Where causes issues and tension and frustration and problems and all that stuff. Where are they dropping off and so on and so forth. So you're actually seeing all that in real time, which is great. But again, it's at that higher level. Or rather it's at that lower level. So instead of thinking like, what is the overall flow and how am I feeling that, you'll get that, but you're going to get a lot of the lower level stuff of like, where do I put my cursor? Where's my eyeball going to go? Is the button in the right spot? Like, is this a link versus that? Like, you're going to get all that stuff. And if you're ready for it, you need to do it. If you're not ready for it, go with a lower fidelity prototype, because you're not ready for that kind of information. But so when you're in the room and you're talking to these people, what you're looking for is everything that I had just said in terms of how they're experiencing it. So you're looking for where do they get stuck? Where do they have questions? Where are their friction points? Where do they look confused? But more than anything else, you're watching their face and you're watching their eyes, and you're seeing, when do their eyes light up, right? They're like, oh, right? Because that's what you want. You want their eyes to light up. You're looking, if you start seeing the, right, then you need to watch for that too, because that's also giving you signals about where you are on the wrong track. So that's what you want to do when you get in front of a customer. Pay attention for the signals, find out, get an answer to your question about, like in the example of the onboarding, like, are they getting from A to Z? Are they doing what I wanted them to do? Are they realizing the value out of this thing? Does my question get answered, right? And then where are the friction points along the way? Where are the problems? And then after you show the prototype to them and you set it down, then you have a conversation about it, and you actually go through the process of interviewing them, and you pull out all those skills that you used when you're doing customer interviews at the start, and you pull them all back again. You put them in the context of this prototype, and again, get that empathy and figure out where they're coming from, because you're getting a lot of inspiration, a lot of ideas, and a lot of just like really good tactical stuff that you can work on in the future. So that's what you do with prototypes for customers. That's how that runs. So that's the last question. But a couple of little things. So I'm here every Thursday at 10 a.m. to answer your questions. So I'll be right back a week from now on June 23rd at 10 a.m. If you have a question, you can always submit it at the link in the description. Also, this link, you can record a little video, you can do text, you can do whatever you want. If you record a video, I'll play it right here on the show. Kind of cool, kind of fun. And remember that next week, I'm gonna do a little pitch tear down. So if you want your deck reviewed, send me your deck, and we'll do it live right here in office hours. It'll be a lot of fun. So let's do that. And then lastly, if you are around 5 o'clock Pacific on June 21st, which is a little less than 2 weeks from now, we're going to, or a little less than 1 week from now, we're going to be doing a little talk at Startup Grind on business models. So I'm going to talk about how first-time founders can create like a really compelling, really winning business models in the marketplace, even though you don't have a lot of experience with startups. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Again, link in the show notes. It's completely free. So come, bring your questions and kind of challenge me on that. Otherwise, thanks so much. Let me know what you guys are working on down in the comments. Always really curious about that. And remember to give this video a like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next week.